Hello, welcome back to The Next Page, your podcast on multilateralism at the UN Library and Archives, Geneva. We've had quite a few episodes this year about artificial intelligence and how it can be used in diplomatic affairs and its impact on international relations. And today we're going to explore further how AI can be used in peacemaking and negotiations. I'm Amy Smith, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Claude Bruderlien, who is a researcher and lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, the Harvard T-Chan School of Public Health, and also at the Graduate Institute here in Geneva. So welcome, Claude, to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to see you, Amy.
It's so nice to have you with us. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about yourself and especially about the focus of your work.
Very good. Well, I'm a professional negotiator. I've been working on negotiation my whole career. Started with the UN, in fact, with OCHA in the 1990s, and worked in places like Afghanistan, North Korea, West Africa. I work with the ICRC in the Middle East, and I really gain experience by learning by doing and engaging with difficult counterparts and developing my own skills and methods. And I was quite surprised at the time to see that there was no real training on negotiation, no guidelines, no tools to negotiate. We were basically told, go negotiate, find a space of agreement and for access or for delivery of humanitarian relief or for running a hospital in a war zone. So it was rather haphazard. And that's why in the middle of my career, I got interested in doing research on what makes a good negotiator. It seems to be such an experiential adventure that people learn by doing, and through their experience become better negotiators. So there's something to learn. If there's something to learn, there must be something to research, right? So at Harvard University, we started a research project capturing negotiation tools and methods as being developed by the practitioners on the front line. And it was called Frontline Negotiation. This research started in 2012 while I was strategic advisor to the president of the ICRC. That led to the creation of a center in Geneva called the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation. And in 2019, I wrote the first manual on frontline negotiation based on this research. So we really interview over 400 practitioners across domains and looking at how do they navigate complex negotiation. They develop their own intuition through their experience, but also reflection on what are the best practices in this domain. And that's where AI came in, because now that we had this systematic way of looking at negotiation, now that we could identify through empirical research what are good practices, well, AI came in to say, can AI help in implementing some of these tools in real time, real negotiation? Because you see, Amy, the problem in negotiation, partly on the front line, is that people are under pressure of time, pressure of resources. Very few have any sort of training in that domain. And ultimately, the tools that have been developed by practitioners over decades take time and take training and resources to implement. Is it to analyze a complex environment? Is it to identify the position of the parties, map stakeholders? Many negotiators in Yemen or in the Sudan or in Afghanistan don't have the resources and time to do that. So AI came in as an interesting avenue, if I may say, to see, can we automatize some of these functionalities using artificial intelligence and providing a platform for a negotiation team to start to have informed conversation about the context. And that's how the project started 2 years ago, where it mutated from this empirical study to how to automatize and further augment the capacity of negotiators to plan their negotiation, to run simulations, to have a negotiation coach, and further down the road to see how we can develop a community of practice of these negotiators.
This is really fascinating work. And it sounds like, 2 years, it's really at the beginning and a very exciting thing to take forward. Perhaps you could illustrate that if we dive in straight away with a real life example, perhaps, of AI having been used in a conflict resolution situation. Would you be able to give us an example?
Well, absolutely. Well, there are so many domains in which AI is being used. It's being used in global health, around vaccination campaigns. It's being used in campus negotiation, where you have a crisis on campus with the student movement. It's being used in climate negotiation. Interestingly, right to the COP that will take place in Baku, there are now delegations who have been trained to use AI models to analyze complex environment, identify areas of potential agreements, and further down the road, manage risk associated to some of these agreements. But there is a paradox, is that AI is coming through an inductive process. Organizations are quite reluctant to establish AI as a method because there are issues of transparency of the models, issue of privacy, leakage, hallucination. We're still in the early stage of this technology, and it takes a lot of resources and expertise to establish autonomous AI model. So you have these open AI models available, and it's mostly individuals who take on their own to learn how to prompt these models and start to navigate complex negotiations. So most of the use we have is under the radar. And it's through this community of practice that we have established at Frontline Associates that we're trying to bring this practice up to be more visible, accessible for research, but also for organizations to realize that they will need to invest the resources in training their staff and making them more aware also of the risk associated in using open platform. And then see at one point soon, I guess, to establish their own AI model internally. So then they're not connected to the open platform, and then they can better manage the confidentiality aspect.
Exactly. Yes, I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. But let's perhaps be a little bit more specific about why AI is relevant for negotiations. I mean, you've mentioned there a lot of different types of negotiations or contexts in which AI has been used already. Tell us a little bit more about that, the relevance.
Okay, well, I'll give you the example of a climate negotiation. For countries or organizations who go to the next COP in Baku, for example, well, the COP is over 100,000 participants. There's thousands of actors interacting in this conference and deciding on issues related to adaptation, to climate finance, to loss and prejudice. These are very important conversations. But for countries like, Mali, with a delegation of 6 participants, getting into this conference and monitoring the various tracks they need to engage based on the mission statement they have, they cannot compete with a delegation from Brazil, for example, which count 1,600 participants, or Canada, 800 participants. But Mali or Niger or Afghanistan, for that matter, are extremely affected by these climate transformation and should be able to participate. So AI comes in here as a platform to support the analysis of all the streaming of data coming from all these tracks of negotiation every day. We're talking terabytes of data being produced in terms of reports, scientific analysis, policy evaluation, minutes of meetings that are produced at every hour of these conferences. And with AI, you have the possibility to sort this information based on what your mission statement is, what your priorities are, to identify what are the bits and pieces that you absolutely need to know that is going on, and what you can spare yourself. So AI filters, categorize these information, and prepare these short summaries in the format you need, the language you need to keep you abreast right from your iPhone, from your smartphone, if you want. Then there's AI coming in as well to help you interpret this information in the sense of what are your priorities in these negotiations, what are the agenda you should have for your meeting, who you should see in priority in the next 6 to 12 hours, because there is a power play going on around a particular issue, mapping out these stakeholders, providing agendas for these meetings, writing draft letters or draft notes that you want to distribute. And then there is the AI ability to simulate these meetings to prepare you. So if your delegation of Mali needs to meet, I don't know, the Chinese delegation to talk about the role of civil society around climate change, well, you will have, this is a very important meeting. You can practice this meeting because the AI model has in itself, the last 10 years of positions of China. It has the ability to summarize these positions, to prepare a discourse, and to simulate that meeting between you and that delegation. So when you have the real meeting, you went through all the possibility and the options. And ultimately, you can have the AI debriefing you, asking you questions. How did the meeting went? And comparing these notes back with the database and saying, could you have done this differently? Could it have been done more effectively? So there's a training component, constantly comparing the latest result, the latest input to what your objectives were.
It sounds like there are tremendous advantages compared to more traditional methods. But are these AI tools available to the delegations who need them?
Well, the AI tool as a technology is very much accessible. You have open AI models, for example, ChatGPT, that essentially is for free or $20 a month, and you have a tremendous power in these machines. But it's like a wild horse. It needs to be tamed and needs to be ruled. Okay. If you don't know how to prompt these machines, if you don't know how to instruct them, not particularly useful. And I really imagine kind of, having a wild horse in the garden. It's not going to follow any patterns or, it needs to be trained. And actually the user needs to be trained to train the AI. So yes, the accessibility is there in terms of technology, but it's not necessarily where it should be in terms of access to training on the use of AI, into prompting and learning, and also understanding the limitation of the AI model. Because, all of us are trained, if I may say, to use Google. It's a very deterministic platform. It's an index of documents all over the internet. The AI is not an index. It's a machine that calculates probabilities, right? Although it sounds very authoritative, it's still a probabilistic model. And that needs training to realize what are the limitations, what are the level of uncertainties, and how you can augment its capacity to fit your purpose, to really be of service to you. It needs some training and practice. And that's why working with the Graduate Institute and Harvard, we're developing this community of practice to make this training available at no cost, that you can start acquiring the basic skills so that you can further, embark in simulating some negotiation and preparing your teams. Because you see, Amy, the key point here is the AI is not there to substitute the negotiator. It's there as an additional tool to help teams of negotiate collaborate better. You see, when you have an AI model in the conversation, you augment your capacity in terms of treatment of information, in terms of reasoning and logic, but it doesn't replace you from the strategic decisions, to say, well, should we make this offer? Who we should talk to? The AI is really there to augment. It's like an assistant, a research team, a policy team, but ultimately, the driver of that negotiation is you and your delegation, right? And it needs this delegation to learn to use the AI for the AI to be of interest. Now, there are research who are actually aiming at replacing the negotiator to say, well, if the AI can produce better results, well, why don't we have the AI negotiating, making proposal? Still you have people at the table, but the AI is much more present in producing content and generating proposals and letters and documents. We tend to be much more reluctant about that because for us, negotiation is a relationship between people. You can have the best content and you have catastrophic negotiation. So it's important for people to realize they shouldn't look at AI as a threat, but as an opportunity. It's a tool. As we have cars, we have airplanes. Well, AI is a technology tool. You need to learn how to use it. Otherwise, you're going to have serious trouble. And that's where we are currently. The first years of this technology, people are a bit uncertain how to get into the car, how to start it, how to drive it down the road. Some are getting better, take advantage of it. And others says, oh, I'm never going to climb on that engine. I mean, we're not there to force people, but I'm personally convinced over the next 5 years, there's going to be negotiator with AI that will have a tactical advantage over negotiators without AI. And that's what we're trying to prepare, making sure that we have a fair access to AI, we have an effective AI, but also a responsible use of AI. So that's are the key points of this community of practice.
Excellent. I hope you will give us some of the information to share in the show notes about the community of practice.
Absolutely. With great pleasure.
You've talked a little bit about preparing and the details of what we actually do with AI tools for negotiations. Tell us a little bit more concretely, how would we go about preparing for a negotiation?
Very good. Well, AI is of particular use with what we call complex adversarial negotiation. Okay, so you go into a negotiation where there's a lot of information. You may have also misinformation, disinformation, but there's a lot of, let's call, data floating around in a dynamic manner to the point it's maybe quite confusing. What is really going on? Who will be at the negotiation table? What will be their agenda? What is actually the problem? The problem may in itself be quite complex. We may not have all the expertise. So the first use of AI is to put things in order, that you have structures and instructor your AI model to sort this information according to pre-established rules, right? In terms of categorization of facts, of norms, of historical data, organizing all this information in an ongoing, dynamic manner. So you have this kind of radar which sort and filter information to what is most relevant. And then as you now understand better the situation in live form, then you have who are the counterparts? What are their position? What are the reasoning behind these positions? How they got there? And that is a logical analysis to understand what's the reasoning of a particular counterpart. And based on the information you have and what is on the internet, what are the values? The cultural values, the hope, the fears, the history behind that type of parties and situation and position. So it gives you context, if I may say, before you look simply at the position of the party. Because of course, you see, in an adversarial negotiation, the starting position is never the real position. In an adversarial negotiation, parties will come to the negotiation table either in a defensive mode, which therefore they can have defensive position they don't really wish, or in a too assertive position, saying, oh, I'm going to simply push, but they're ready to take a compromise if they are properly negotiated. So the opening position is not the true position. But with the AI, you have the possibility that by putting it into context of creating what we call the putative position. What is the real position then? You've not been told, but with all the data available, you're able to create this putative position and start to say, well, this is what I'm negotiating with as a position, despite the entry points. So that's the analysis really of the position. Then you have the analysis of the network of influence, because that position is often a derivative of various influence that stakeholders have on the counterpart. Is this their organization, their neighbors, their colleagues, the professional association? Is it the media? You have a lot of stakeholders in a negotiation that are influencing proactively the position of your counterpart. And you're part of that world too. You can have relationship with the media, with the professional association, with the organization, the neighbors and the cousins. As you negotiate, you have also access to some of these stakeholders, and the AI will help you to identify them, to create pathways of influence, to consider them as a lever into this negotiation, providing them, again, a new analysis of what is the position of the stakeholders? What is the stake of the media in the situation? How should you approach these stakeholders? How can you make offer of collaboration? And so on. And it will also advise you who you should avoid, where you have really a deficit of, goodwill, or some are really spoilers, who you trying to contain that they have such a negative impact on your negotiation. And as you move along, you come to the point of how can you de-escalate attention? The AI will help you even train yourself as a skill. What are the various steps you should take to de-escalate the tension? Not go right away to say, oh, this is my offer, but to say, no, how to build trust, foster legitimacy in a step-by-step way. And all this is being trained into the AI model. This comes from, manuals like the Frontline Negotiation Manual and other books on complex negotiation that are shaped into instruction for the AI. So the AI has these books and rules and methods and apply it to your specific case, helping you step by step walk through this knowledge and this data and come with very positive and constructive output. So AI is there to accompany you toward the negotiation table and then out of the negotiation table, because then you can train your model to interview you, to say, oh, how did it go? Where does it stand? And take that data back into the model and plan the next step based on what happened.
So it really does sound like AI can really assist so much with very complex situations, as you've just described. You talked about the prompts, though, and learning how to write the prompts. Could you tell us a bit more about that and what you would need to include?
Yeah, well, with pleasure, Amy. The point here with prompts is to realize that the AI model is nothing else than a machine that responds to probability based on a huge database, okay? So if you go to the AI model and you ask a final question, what should I tell my neighbor who has a barking dog at night that really makes me, lose my sleep? Well, the AI model is going to go into the database and look at your words. What should I tell my neighbor who has a dog barking? And not without any context, he says, well, you should try to convince him to get his dog trained. You say, well, thank you very much. This I knew, right? The AI model, if it's not being used in a logical step, is not very powerful. You should have said, okay, let me explain to the model what is the situation. I have a neighbor. We live in a tightly knitted community. Actually, my neighbor is the chief of police of the municipality. These are important information if you have a problematic neighbor. And we have other friends in the neighborhood. We share some friends. And then there's this dog, what breed of dog, and what are the possibility for training? You contextualize and you get the model to ask questions on all these aspects. And then you go step by step. It says, now that you have the context, you have analyzed the context through these various prompts where you upload information, in fact, to your model. Then you say, now help me for my first meeting with the neighbor. I want to have a positive meeting. Maybe the AI model will say, well, don't talk about the dog. Talk about other aspects. Talk about the solidarity and the value of the community, the importance of family life. The model will start to really guide you through this step. Who you should talk in the neighborhood. Maybe there's someone who has this role as a mediator. So the prompts is really a dialogue with a machine. Right? And it's different in that sense from this deterministic approach with Google. You don't have a dialogue with Google. You say, show me a book to deal with difficult neighbors that have barking dogs, and then you have a website that will tell you that's what you should do. This is a deterministic model because this information has already been concocted somewhere, somehow by someone on the internet. The AI model doesn't have information like this. It has probabilities, it has patterns, but to tap into these patterns, you need to have the appropriate question at the appropriate level. Then you have an immense power. For example, if you say, well, you need to talk to Marius, who's the mediator in the neighborhood, then you say, well, I want to talk to Marius. Can you simulate the conversation with Marius about mediation to deal with the chief of police who has a barking dog? And then the whole power of the AI model is going to shift to mediation in the neighborhood with a specific friend, how you should bring this friend to come into the situation, and how to develop this relationship with that mediator. You don't have that on Google. Google is this two-dimensional library of books and documents, well, the AI is a partner in your reflection. So prompting is a key tool here, because this is how you're going to talk, how you're going to instruct, and how you're going to guide the AI model to give you exactly what you're looking for.
That's beautifully illustrated. I can really see how you need to become very good at observing and being able to describe the situation. What would you say the skills negotiators really need to develop to be using AI?
I think the best skill they should have is to have a logical mindset that says, okay, almost algorithmic, from point A to point B to point C to point D. What is the simple logical way I should prompt my AI to give me the most effective output? How are you going to slice the problem? For example, you go to a shop, you need to put clothes on, you need to put shoes on, the AI needs these various steps, because its whole power of going through its database of patterns is quite simple. Ultimately, it's not that sophisticated. It's the database that is humongous, and the analysis of patterns that is integrated to it. So by going step by step, you have all this power in one step that create content for the next one. When we do this training, we say, imagine this a layered cake, like a wedding cake. You start with the first layer that you really have to establish what are the basis of the context, and ask me question about it. Who are the actors? Who are the stakeholders? What are the difficult issues? And then you bring a document about training dogs. You bring a document about the municipality rules. You upload data until you feel that the AI model has proper instructions and information. Then you go to the next questions. Oh, who are the stakeholders? And then you'll see a marvelous generation of information. Who are all the possible stakeholders, and what are their relationships? What are their connections? What are their own agendas? It would take you hours to produce this mapping of stakeholders. The AI model will produce it in 5 seconds. But this power here has, again, to be harnessed to says, well, let's now focus on Marius, who could be a mediator. And now it will ask further questions about Marius. Do you have further, on his profile, on his history of the relationship with the chief of police, and so on. And so it's through the interaction, having simple prompts, but having in the back of our head this very good understanding of what AI can do and how to make it most effective. But also always to understand that in that case, the large language model is a language model. It's not experience. It's something that users have some difficulty, is to realize that, if the AI tells you, well, go talk to Marius so you can talk to your neighbor, it's not based on experience. It's not like you would ask an advisor to a negotiation that has 20 years experience in community disturbances. And through intuition and experience, they will say, why don't you talk to Marius? No, the AI model is based on language. Okay, that's somewhere on the internet. He had been able to do an assemblage of data based on probability that you probably need to talk to a mediator. In that case, the mediator is Marius, and that's what mediators do. And that's what mediators need. That is based on language, not on someone that has experience. So when you go into adversarial negotiation, one of the main obstacles is emotion. We are affected. We are, let's say, intimidated by the counterpart in the situation. If you have a human advisor, they have empathy. They will understand your emotion, and they will start to advise you based on that factor. AI has no emotion. AI has no empathy. AI is a language factory. Okay. So you need to understand when you actually need psychological support, solidarity, emotional support, which AI may look like they're giving you, because it's based on language too. Our emotional support is based on language. We communicate through language, and somewhere the internet has a lot of language for solidarity and empathy. But it is not empathy. It's not a human being. So it's important for users to understand when they need a real person to have an advice how to deal with the neighbor because they are intimidated. They have, a psychological burden associated to it. And in adversarial negotiation, you as an individual are a target of pressure. The counterpart will bully you. I've been in negotiation where I've been insulted, I've been threatened. This is emotion. The AI will simply give me advice without taking this into consideration. Although even if you ask for it, then it will go into psychology literature to give you some advice. But again, it's a language factory. So it's very important that user understand the strength and limitation of AI and to participate in this community of practice in a way, sharing their experience, but also at times their frustration with these machines.
So on the limitations, how do negotiators using AI spot the inaccuracies and what also about bias in the information that it's drawing on? How do we avoid those types of flaws?
Well, there's a whole discussion about biases. In social science, in social life, we see biases as obstacle for a through conversation because we're meeting someone who has biases and we cannot really get deeper into the conversation because of the biases on gender, on race, on age, on political affiliation, and so on. We see that currently in the electoral campaigns. It's very hard to have an honest conversation about climate or migration because of biases. Now, in machine learning, in large database that is drawing from the internet has all our biases in it, right? We're not trying to avoid the biases. We're trying to identify them because the biases are part of the conversation. We're not trying to neutralize the biases as much as we're trying to rebalance them. If you're meeting a counterpart in a frontline negotiation, of course they're going to be biases. You don't want to avoid them. You want to be able precisely to say, here I see a bias. How can I communicate within that scope in a way to get my message through? So you don't want to aggravate the biases. You want to mitigate them, but you want to see them. So we're telling participants to these trainings, don't be afraid of biases. What's the problem is the biases that have been uncovered. Okay, the one that you don't see. So you have to train your model to identify the biases, and they're excellent for that because biases can be seen through language, what is missing, what words have been used, and then you can say as well, it seems that your counterpart has these following biases. Therefore, these are the recommendations to rebalance in your communication to be able to not trigger these biases or to try to avoid these biases to spoil the conversation.
Exactly. Yes. You've just spoken about the models and training the models. I was wondering about the ethical implications and confidentiality about sensitive data and so on. How do we address those type of issues?
Excellent question. The first element to understand is that the machine per se has been trained. When we're working about open platform, it's different with closed platform where, let's say, the United Nations would host an AI model, it has to train the model. But let's take OpenAI ChatGPT. The model is trained by OpenAI, and we don't have access to that training. So there's a real issue of transparency, but training a model costs hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's very hard to say that we could train our own. So this is being trained by this corporation on huge amount of data. What we do as a user is that we're providing a framework through prompting and instruction of AI model to better use that training that has been done, okay, and get the type of output we want to have, okay? So the model in itself doesn't retain the information you provide. If you provide a document about your neighborhood, about the chief of police and the dog, this information will be accessible to the AI model only as long as you maintain your chat open. You close the chat, the information is gone. The AI model has not been trained on that. So there's not issue of confidentiality of the information you upload vis-a-vis the model. There are issues of confidentiality vis-a-vis the host, that is OpenAI, or Google for Gemini, or Microsoft for Copilot, the model in itself doesn't retain the information. The model is simply sitting there waiting to be prompted and then forgets about what there was in the prompt. The company that's hosting it may want to use the information you brought in, that you uploaded. So it's in the relationship between you as a user or your organization and that host. So there are companies who will hire OpenAI or Google or Microsoft to run an AI model for them, and it will have very strict rules of what information can be retained into the corporation. But this is true with your email, with Gmail or Facebook. So the confidentiality, therefore, is not linked to AI technology. It's linked to the hosting of the database and how this host has access to information that you may not want to share. Ultimately, what we tell the user currently is that unless and until your organization has a private model, do not upload confidential data. You can use the model through effective accommodation. For example, if it's your neighbor with his dog, you don't need to put the name of the city, or you put another name, or the municipality, or the neighbor, or the name of the dog for that matter. The point here is what will make this information recognizable and that people could draw confidential data from it if ever they would have access to it. So we're very strict about that. You do not upload confidential data, as you would not put an attachment on Google, on a Gmail. I'm saying people will simply upload confidential data to their Gmail. They're giving that information to Google. Yes, there are pages and pages and pages of rules saying what they're going to do or not. But how do you know this will be respected in 10 years, in 20 years? This information is no longer under your control. So as a rule of thumb, you never upload confidential information to a database that you don't control. And that is applicable to AI as it's applicable to Facebook or to any other database.
Very good advice. You talked much earlier in the conversation about humans and understanding the context of negotiations and emotions and the other factors that come in, social, psychological, cultural factors. Would you like to talk a little bit more about AI helping negotiators improve their work in cross-cultural communication, and also talk a little bit about what's the best way to have human input in negotiations?
It's an excellent question, because I truly believe that AI is and will transform negotiation profoundly. Negotiation has an aspect of analytical, tactical, strategic process of trying to resolve a conflict that we have with someone else or find an agreement, a compromise. And this has, it's an intellectual journey, trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the others and so on. And at the same time, it's a human relationship. It's between two people or several people. And even if it's at distance through Zoom or whatnot, the nonverbal aspect is very important. The connection and the trust we have in the counterpart, especially for the implementation of the agreement. We need to build that relationship, to deepen that relationship in a way to find a true solution that will be viable for the parties. Now, we've been running negotiation for hundreds, thousands of years without AI, and I'm sure it's going to be fine in the future with people who don't have AI. But then come AI, which augment your capacity multiple times on the analytical part, in terms of training you for complex negotiation, in terms of understanding complex environment and difficult issues and observing the negotiation and giving you comments and debriefing you. So you have the intellectual part, which has multiplied by 10. If you're properly using AI, you can no longer negotiate the same way, because you have now a genius in your back office telling you so much on how to negotiate this particular case on this angle. Now, what does it do on the more relational one? You're talking about cultural barriers, gender barriers, empathy, understanding the counterpart in their own context, and what are the emotional stakes they may have in that negotiation. That is now available, that you have covered the context, you've covered the terabytes of data in a climate negotiation. You know exactly what you're supposed to tell your Chinese delegation regarding civil society participation. Now you can sit down with your counterpart. You have your agenda. The intellectual part is covered. Maybe now it's the time to look at the other side of the table and trying to understand what will drive this counterpart toward a solution as a much more human-to-human connection. So my hope here, and we can see that coming, is while people are often intimidated by the complexity, the adversity, no, we are resolving the complexity part. It becomes much more accessible to be able to analyze these environments and to be at par with very powerful counterparts. You could have negotiated with huge corporations, with very important government in multilateral negotiation or in bilateral negotiation. Now you have with you a team of 20 analysts that just gave you all the instruction you needed for this negotiation. But now that's the part that your rapport to be established, the connection to be made, the true values and commitment you bring to the table to serve it, right? And negotiators have to be ready for that. And they wish they are, but they may not be ready. It takes experience to negotiate with the Taliban or negotiate with people that you have profound disagreement. This is a training of human skills you need to do. So it's an opportunity. I think negotiators of tomorrow will have these very powerful analytical tools, but then they will need to develop new abilities and new skills to connect that some would have after 20 years of experience. Martin Griffiths and others are extraordinary negotiators, but it took them decades. Now people can start early because they have this AI ability now to control the issue, control the environment. Now it's for them to engage in the relationship.
This is wonderful. It's very exciting developments. Do you see any new further development on the very near horizon?
Well, as I said, the new development we'll see is I think this focus on development of relationships across divide. Now the divide is really, dividing us. We have us and the others, and we see that in Europe, between Western Europe and Russia. We see that in North-South. We see that in all locations, and we have difficulties of having dialogue with people we need to have dialogue to. I think the next development is really to reconquer this ability of having true dialogue with people you disagree with, being able to, and not to be so much in a risk avoidance mode. Right? And how AI will train us to do that, that will be interesting. And all this capacity of stimulation. You have research on visual aid where they can read the emotions in the face of counterparts, of others, they can train us to be more open, more amenable. I think this notion of nonverbal human-to-human connection that we need to, as I said, reconquer is something that the AI will help us. Otherwise, there is the ability of organization to equip themselves with the proper model and train their staff. When email entered organization, it changed entirely how an organization work in terms of internal communication, storage of data, and so on. AI will have an even more transformative role in negotiation. Policy department, legal department, operational decision will function fundamentally differently. Now that AI models can produce a policy note and the best legal advice, in a matter of seconds, when you would take 3 weeks to wait for the legal department to come with basically a jurisprudential analysis, So yes, it's going to have an impact. It's going to hurt organization work as the email did in terms of hierarchy and control. But once they go through this period, organization will be much more effective in producing reliable, predictable output and focus the resources of where humans are needed, in this term of communication and connection that we cannot replace.
That is a wonderful way to end on communication and connection. Claude, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. A great pleasure. Thank you.